I never thought I'd tell this story out loud. I've carried it in my heart for years, tucked away like a secret I was too ashamed, or maybe too proud, to share. But now, sitting here in my quiet little house, with the hum of the old ceiling fan above me and the scent of my grandmother's roses lingering in the air, I feel like I owe it to myself, and maybe to anyone who's ever been wronged. My name is Claire, and I grew up in a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business, or at least they thought they did. My family wasn't rich, but we were complicated. My father, a stoic man with eyes that never quite smiled, worked long hours at the factory. My mother, on the other hand, filled the house with warmth, laughter, and a faint trace of anxiety that I'd later realize had more to do with secrets than anything else. I had two siblings. My older brother Jason, who always seemed to float through life effortlessly, and my younger sister Lily, whose innocence and curiosity sometimes got her into trouble. We weren't perfect, not by a long shot, but we were family. And that's what I clung to when the world started showing its darker colors. By the time I hit my late 20s, I thought I had it all figured out. I'd met David, a man who seemed too good to be true. Handsome, charming, successful, but not arrogant. He had this laugh that could make any room feel warmer, and he always seemed to know exactly what to say when life got messy. We married young, in a small chapel surrounded by blooming magnolias and the faint scent of my mother's perfume. Our wedding felt like a promise. Two people against the world, ready to carve out a life of love and laughter. At first, it really was that perfect. We bought a house on the outskirts of town, a place with a creaky staircase and a yard big enough for a trampoline, a garden, and maybe even a future dog, or three. We spent weekends painting walls, arguing over furniture placement, and laughing at our own clumsiness. David was everything I had dreamed of. I felt safe. I felt home. Then came the subtle changes. At first, I didn't notice. I chalked up the missed calls, the late nights, the quiet, distant look in his eyes to the stress of work. But little things started piling up. Receipts from restaurants he didn't tell me about, mysterious text messages that he would delete when I walked into the room, the way he suddenly seemed protective of his phone as if it held some dangerous secret. I remember the night it really hit me. We were supposed to be celebrating our 5th anniversary. I had cooked his favorite meal, set the table with candles, and even dug out the vintage wine we had saved for something special. But he came home late, smelled faintly of perfume that wasn't mine, and offered a half-hearted smile. I tried to ignore the pit in my stomach, telling myself I was imagining things. But deep down, something had shifted. I began to notice more. The small lies, the disappearances, the hushed phone calls. My once perfect life started to feel like a fragile glass ornament teetering on the edge of a table, ready to shatter at the slightest touch. I couldn't explain it, not even to myself, but the feeling of betrayal, though invisible, was heavy in the air. Meanwhile, my family. They were everything to me. Jason had moved across the country for work, leaving Lily and me to fend for ourselves in the chaos of adult life. Mom was always supportive, though she had her own battles, her own secrets she'd never share. Dad had a way of showing love in quiet gestures, a cold beer on a Friday night, a hand on your shoulder when no one was watching. But even their presence couldn't shield me from the storm brewing in my own home. I remember thinking as I sat alone in our living room one night, the dim light of the street lamp casting shadows across the walls. How could someone I trusted so completely betray me? How could David, the man I thought I knew, become a stranger overnight? Little did I know, that night was only the beginning. The lies would multiply, the betrayals would sting sharper, and what I once thought of as love would turn into a wildfire that consumed everything I had built. And me. I would find a strength I never knew existed, fueled by anger, heartbreak, and a desire for justice that would take me to places I never imagined. But let me take you back to the beginning, to the moments that felt innocent and safe, before everything began to unravel. Because to understand the depth of what happened, you have to know where I started, how ordinary my life seemed, and how devastatingly ordinary it could be shattered. Our neighborhood was quiet, almost sleepy. Children played until dusk, neighbors waved from their porches, and the scent of freshly cut grass was a constant companion. On paper, our lives looked like a perfect American dream. A happy family, a white picket fence, weekend barbecues, and holiday gatherings that were meticulously planned and lovingly executed. But every picture has its shadows, every story its hidden fractures. And ours? Well, ours was about to crack wide open. David seemed to have it all together. He was a rising star in his company, known for his charm and problem-solving skills. He'd talk about his dreams with a sincerity that made me believe in the future, in the possibility that love could be this steady, unwavering force. And for a while, it was. We traveled together, laughed together, and built our little world brick by brick. But perfection is fragile. And when the first cracks appear, there's no stopping them from widening. I remember the exact moment I realized that life as I knew it would never be the same. It wasn't a grand revelation, not a single, dramatic event. It was subtle, an almost imperceptible glance, a word spoken too casually, a shadow of a smile that wasn't meant for me. That's when I knew. Something was terribly, dangerously wrong. I wish I could say I confronted him immediately. I wish I could say I was brave in that moment. But it all started with a small, insignificant slip, a text message that buzzed on David's phone while we were at dinner. I had asked him to pass the salt, and when he reached for it, his phone lit up with a name I didn't recognize. Samantha. At first, I tried to brush it off. Maybe it's a colleague, I told myself. Maybe it's nothing. But the way he immediately tucked the phone into his pocket, with a flush of tension that didn't belong to him, set off alarms I couldn't ignore. Over the next few weeks, my suspicion became an obsession. I started noticing patterns, the tiny inconsistencies that once seemed trivial. His late-night meetings that were never mentioned until after the fact, the sudden business trips that always conveniently aligned with the weekend, and the faint scent of perfume, different from mine, that lingered in the car or on his clothes. I tried to convince myself I was overreacting, that maybe my mind was playing tricks. But then came the night I found the first undeniable proof. I was up late, unable to sleep, the house silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. David's laptop was open on the kitchen counter, forgotten in his rush to brush his teeth and slip into bed. Something, a mix of intuition and fear, pushed me toward it. I hesitated, my hands trembling, knowing that once I looked, there would be no turning back. And then I saw it, emails, messages, photos, evidence of a life he had hidden from me, a world in which I didn't exist. Samantha wasn't just a friend. She was the other woman. My heart stopped. My vision blurred. Every memory of our life together suddenly felt like a lie, carefully constructed to keep me blind, to keep me compliant. I read the messages over and over, each one a dagger twisting deeper into my chest. They spoke in hushed tones of secret meetings, stolen kisses, whispered promises. They spoke of a passion that, according to them, I could never fulfill. And in that moment, I realized the truth. The life I had built with David was a facade, a beautiful, cruel illusion. I didn't confront him that night. I couldn't. The shock was too heavy, the betrayal too raw. Instead, I sat in the darkness, feeling the floorboards beneath me, trying to breathe without hyperventilating. Anger coursed through me like molten lava, threatening to burn everything in its path. And amidst the rage, a cold, creeping sense of clarity began to take hold. I had choices. I could confront him, break apart the fragile remnants of our life immediately, and risk losing control. Or I could watch, learn, and plan. And in that moment, I made a decision. I would not allow myself to be a victim. Not anymore. The following days were a blur. I played the part of the unsuspecting wife, smiling, laughing, pretending everything was fine. But behind that facade, I was watching him closely, studying his habits, noting every detail that might be useful. I discovered patterns in his lies, weaknesses in his secrecy, and cracks in his carefully constructed story. The deeper I dug, the more I realized how deep the betrayal went. It wasn't just Samantha. There were hidden bank accounts, secret vacations, even whispered mentions of friends I didn't know existed. David had created an entire parallel life, one that he believed I would never uncover. But I had. And now, the power dynamic had shifted. I began keeping a journal, documenting every lie, every suspicious interaction, every shred of evidence I could find. I photographed receipts, recorded conversations, legally, I made sure, and kept meticulous notes. It became almost addictive, the act of unmasking the man I thought I loved, peeling back layer after layer to reveal the darkness beneath. The betrayal was no longer just an emotional wound. It was a puzzle, and I was determined to solve it completely. I confronted his colleagues subtly, asking casual questions that revealed inconsistencies. I traced his business trips, discovering hotels and restaurants that were clearly meant for someone else. Every revelation fed the fire inside me, but also sharpened my focus. One night, I followed him. Not recklessly, but methodically. I watched from a distance as he met Samantha at a cafe, their conversation animated, intimate, their laughter piercing through the night air. I saw the way he touched her hand, the way his eyes softened in a way they never did with me. And in that moment, a part of me shattered completely. But another part, colder, sharper, began to emerge. I realized that anger alone wasn't enough. Tears, shouting, confrontation, these were temporary. True power came from strategy. And I would need strategy if I wanted to reclaim what was mine. The days that followed were a careful balance of normalcy and observation. I smiled at him at breakfast, poured his coffee, asked about his day, all while cataloging every movement, every word, every interaction. The more I observed, the more I saw patterns, predictable routines, weaknesses in his pride, moments where he let his guard down. These would become my tools. It wasn't easy. Every night, I wrestled with my emotions. Love, heartbreak, fury, sadness. The man I once adored had become the target of my meticulous planning, and that realization both terrified and exhilarated me. I felt like a chess player, moving pieces silently across a board, anticipating his every move without him realizing I had already calculated the checkmate. And then, one night, everything escalated. I caught him red-handed, not through evidence, not through suspicion, but in person. I had returned home early from a business dinner, something I fabricated to give myself time. The moment I opened the door, I saw him. Not in bed, not with some The days after discovering David's betrayal were some of the loneliest of my life. I walked through our home like a ghost, surrounded by the trappings of a life that no longer felt real. Every photo on the wall, every shared memory, every token of love, once comforting, now seemed like a cruel reminder of how easily trust could be shattered. I cried, of course. In the privacy of my bedroom, the bathroom, the quiet moments when no one could see me unravel. But alongside the tears was a simmering anger, a heat that would not be extinguished. And soon, that anger transformed into something far more potent, a meticulous, calculating need for justice. I needed a plan. I needed control. I could no longer allow my emotions to dictate my actions because David's lies had already proven that unchecked love was dangerous. I needed strategy, precision, and patience, the same qualities I had underestimated in myself for years. I started by cataloging every betrayal in painstaking detail. Each lie, each secret meeting, each message to Samantha. Everything went into my private journal. But it wasn't just about remembering. It was about understanding. Where were his weaknesses? When was he most vulnerable? Who did he trust blindly? And then came the subtle mind games. I began testing him in small, almost imperceptible ways. Casual mentions of things he hadn't told me, offhand questions that revealed whether he was telling the truth, leaving small traces of observation around the house to gauge his reactions. Every twitch, every hesitation, every sigh told me more than any confrontation ever could. I also started preparing my allies, though subtly. My younger sister, Lily, had always been intuitive, and she quickly picked up on my silent determination. I didn't tell her everything, of course. Some things were mine alone. But I let her know enough so she could watch, notice, and report back small details without tipping him off. Meanwhile, I had to manage the storm inside me. Some nights, the anger felt unbearable. I would sit alone, staring at the ceiling, imagining every possible way to make him regret his betrayal. But I learned to channel that fury into planning rather than destruction. Revenge wasn't about impulsive bursts of anger. It was about precision strikes, perfectly timed and devastatingly effective. I also confronted the uncomfortable truth about myself. That part of me still loved him. That part still remembered the warmth of his smile, the way he once held me when I cried, the quiet nights spent together on the porch. And yet, I could not allow that love to blind me. It was a memory to respect, not a chain to bind me. I had to separate emotion from strategy. I began researching, studying, and observing. I read books about manipulation, deception, and human behavior. I watched videos about psychological tactics and subtle influence. I even studied legal loopholes and financial maneuvers. Not because I wanted him in jail, at least not yet, but because I wanted to know every tool at my disposal. Then came the visualization. Every day, I imagined the moment when I would confront him, not in blind rage, but with control, elegance, and undeniable evidence. I pictured the exact words, the timing, and the setting. I rehearsed my composure, ensuring that when the time came, I would be the one holding the power. But planning revenge wasn't just about targeting him. I also had to protect myself. I secured my finances, hid key documents, and created contingencies in case he tried to fight back. Every move I made was double-edged. It advanced my plan and safeguarded me simultaneously. And yet, even amidst this meticulous preparation, I struggled with doubt. Was I becoming the very thing I hated? Was the line between justice and cruelty blurring? I had to remind myself constantly, this wasn't about hatred. This was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and teaching a man who thought he could betray me without consequence that actions have repercussions. One pivotal night, the plan started to take shape fully. I had gathered enough evidence, messages, photos, financial transactions, and eyewitness accounts from people he thought he could manipulate. I laid it all out on the dining table, each piece of proof like a weapon carefully sharpened and placed in position. The enormity of it was overwhelming, but exhilarating. I finally saw a clear path forward. I also knew I had to be patient. Immediate confrontation would satisfy a momentary desire for vengeance, but it wouldn't have the lasting impact I craved. True revenge required timing, and timing required control. I would wait until the stakes were highest, when he felt untouchable, before I struck. That was when the shock would be most devastating. At the same time, I began planting subtle seeds. Small suggestions, innocent questions, and carefully worded remarks hinted that I was aware, without ever revealing the full truth. David started shifting, perhaps sensing something amiss, but too arrogant to realize the depth of my knowledge. That arrogance would be his downfall. I also considered emotional angles. The betrayal. Over the next several weeks, I fine-tuned my plan. I identified multiple points of leverage, ways to expose him in shocking ways, and scenarios that would maximize his humiliation without crossing into illegality. I thought about emotional blows, financial maneuvers, and social revelations. Each angle was mapped out, rehearsed mentally, and stored in my arsenal. By the end of that period, I felt ready. Not angry, not vengeful in the impulsive sense, but calm, collected, and utterly prepared. The storm that had once raged inside me had been harnessed into a controlled force, precise and unrelenting. The moment had finally arrived. Every sleepless night, every tear, every calculated step had led to this point. I was no longer the woman David had deceived. I was a force he could never have predicted. And I would make sure he knew it, felt it, in every possible way. I began subtly, like a shadow brushing past him. At first, it was psychological. I started leaving small accidental hints that I knew more than I let on. A photo on his desk, a carefully phrased comment in casual conversation, a mysteriously sent email from an anonymous address, all designed to make him question his control, his security, his very judgment. I watched him squirm, his confidence fraying at the edges. It was satisfying, but I needed more. My first real strike was social. David was a man who valued reputation above almost anything else. Friends, colleagues, neighbors, he had crafted a carefully curated life where his charm masked his deceit. I began to dismantle it. I reached out to people he had wronged, shared the truth in carefully measured doses. I didn't lie. I merely revealed what he had tried to hide, letting the natural consequences of betrayal ripple outward. One of the most shocking moments came during a company dinner. David was charming, laughing, spinning his usual web of stories, when I stood and addressed the room. Calm, measured, almost casual, I spoke of integrity, honesty, and the consequences of deception. And then I revealed pieces of the truth. The secret trips, the hidden relationships, the double life he had led, all without naming names. The room went silent. David's face turned pale. His carefully constructed mask cracked before my very eyes. Colleagues who had admired him now looked at him with suspicion and disbelief. But and through it all, I remained composed, calm, measured. Because this wasn't about vengeance for its own sake. It was about justice, reclamation, and proving to myself that I could rise above betrayal and orchestrate outcomes with clarity, control, and intelligence. By the end, I had achieved everything I had planned, and more. David was left to confront the consequences of his choices, to face the reality of a life dismantled not by chance, but by deliberate, precise action. And in that, I found a kind of closure that went beyond satisfaction. It wasn't just revenge. It was empowerment. I had transformed from a woman broken by deceit into a strategist who wielded control with precision. And in the silence that followed the storm, I finally felt free. The storm had passed. The chaos, the revelations, the shattering of illusions, all of it lay behind me. And yet, in the quiet that followed, I realized that the aftermath of betrayal is not just about seeing the other person falter. It's about finding yourself again. David retreated into a hollow version of his former life. The colleagues who had once admired him now avoided his gaze. Friends who had laughed at his charm whispered in caution. Samantha disappeared entirely, her presence erased like chalk from a blackboard. And as for me, I finally felt the liberation that comes from taking back control, from proving not to the world, but to yourself, that no one has the right to define your worth. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The evidence had done its work. The revelations had done theirs, and karma, subtle, inevitable, and perfect, had settled in its own way. The man who had tried to manipulate, deceive, and control was now left with the consequences of every choice he had made. And as I walked through our home, once a place of betrayal, I began reclaiming it. I repainted walls, rearranged furniture, and filled the rooms with light instead of shadows. I planted new flowers in the garden, fragrant and bright, a symbol of renewal. Each small act reminded me that life could be rebuilt, that trust could be restored, not with him, but within myself. I also learned a lesson that no amount of planning or strategizing could fully teach. Betrayal does not define you, your response does. David's lies had hurt me, yes, but they had also awakened a resilience I hadn't known existed. I discovered a strength that was quiet, patient, and calculated. I discovered that anger could be a tool, not a prison. And I discovered that reclaiming your life doesn't require vengeance alone. It requires wisdom, strategy, and the courage to rise above the pain. In the months that followed, I began to rebuild more than just my home. I rebuilt trust in myself. I reconnected with family, strengthened friendships, and focused on passions I had neglected. And every so often, when I caught a glimpse of David in passing, defeated, diminished, yet still unrepentant, I felt a quiet satisfaction. Not rage, not gloating, but a serene acknowledgement that justice had been served, in the most thorough and precise way possible. Life, I realized, has a way of balancing itself. You cannot control the actions of others, but you can control your response. And when you do, when you act with clarity, courage, and strategy, you transform betrayal into empowerment. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I had confronted him immediately, if I had allowed rage to dictate my actions. I shudder at the thought. Because revenge, true revenge, is not impulsive. It is deliberate, exacting, and patient. And in that patience, I found my victory. Now, as I sit quietly on my porch, sipping tea and watching the sun dip behind the trees, I feel at peace. The past no longer haunts me. It informs me. The betrayal no longer wounds me. It strengthens me. And the life I have built, my life, is mine alone, filled with honesty, integrity, and a profound understanding of my own strength. In the end, the lesson is clear. Betrayals will come, people will lie, and hearts will be broken. But the power to rise, to reclaim, and to transform pain into purpose is yours, and yours alone. And when that power is fully realized, no deceit, no manipulation, no betrayal can ever touch you again.